Thanks for listening to the Mornings with Carmen LaBerge podcast, made available thanks to support from listeners just like you.
Inspiring you to bring God back into the conversation of the day. This is Mornings with Carmen LaBerge on Faith Radio.
If we're gonna fly, we fly like eagles, arms out wide. If we're gonna fear, we fear no evil. We will rise. By your power we will go. By your spirit we are bold. If we're gonna stand, we stand as giants. If we're gonna walk, we walk as lions.
Hey, let's start off by taking a deep breath. Go ahead. Close your eyes and take a deep breath. Well, I guess if you're driving, don't close your eyes, but take a deep breath. Exhale all that anxiety and fear and inhale God's peace, His grace, His goodness. Breathe life. Breathe peace. Breathe grace. Go ahead. Take a deep breath. Breathe on me, breath of God. Fill me with life anew, that I may love what thou dost love and do what thou wouldst do. Breathe on me, breath of God, until my heart is pure, until with thee I will one will and do and to endure. Breathe on me, breath of God, till I am wholly thine, until this earthly part of me glows with thy fire divine. Breathe on me, breath of God. So shall I never die, but live with thee the perfect life of thine eternity. Breathe. Just breathe. The scriptures actually open with a description of God breathing over the cosmic chaos. Could you use that today? Literally, this is the beginning of the Bible. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now, the earth was a formless and empty and dark void. And the Spirit hovered over the surface of the deep. The Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. The Spirit there is the Ruach. It is the breath of God. So the opening scene of Genesis depicts God breathing over the formless chaos. And in response, God breathes creation into existence. If God can bring order and beauty out of the chaos, what might His breath do in your life today? Breathe on me, breath of God. Fill me with life anew, that I may love what thou dost love and do what thou wouldst do. What might the breath of God in your life do today? It is the breath of God that is fundamental to our understanding of the Bible. God's breath is the inspiration of the scriptures themselves. That's what Paul says. The scriptures are God-breathed, 2 Timothy 3:16. What might the breath of God do in your life today? God's breath actually animates us. It sustains us. It inspires us. It guides us. Breathe today. Just breathe. The breath of God is God's presence by the power of the Spirit. It's the act of God breathing life into creation and God breathing forth the scriptures and God breathing forth the church. It's in John chapter 20, verse 22 that we see this example of Jesus appearing amongst his disciples. This is after his resurrection, and he's confirming his identity, and he breathes on them and says, receive the Holy Spirit. Breathe on me, breath of God. If you want the Holy Spirit in your life, ask God to breathe on you. New life. That whole scene there is a vision of what happens at Pentecost in Acts chapter 2. And the Spirit descends. The Spirit also enables the church to bear witness to the resurrection of Jesus. It's the Spirit that unlocks our praise and adoration. Paul writes that nobody can say Jesus is Lord but by the power of the Spirit. This breath of God's presence is what enables us to bear witness and testimony in a world that's not yet believing in God. Breathe on me, breath of God. Do you need a fresh wind of the Spirit in your life? Have you asked God to breathe on you today? Maybe you need God to breathe more deeply into your life today. It's really simple. Like if you want it, ask for it. The pouring out of God's Spirit is not unique to creation or the people who walked with Jesus or the days of Pentecost. God breathes today. God breathes today through his word, the Old and New Testaments of the Scriptures. God breathes today through his church, the people of God in the world. God breathes today by the power of his Holy Spirit. Maybe what you and I need is a fresh wind of the breath of God poured out in, among, and through us. Breathe on me, breath of God. Fill me with life anew, that I may love what thou dost love and do what thou wouldst do. Breathe on me, breath of God, until my heart is pure, until with thee I will one will, to do and to endure. Breathe on me, breath of God, till I am wholly thine, until this earthly part of me glows with thy fire divine. Breathe on me, breath of God, so shall I never die, but live with thee the perfect life of thine eternity. I want to invite you today to just breathe. Our friend, the good Dr. Jeff Barrows, is going to join us next from the Christian Medical and Dental Association. I bet he has some things to say about taking a good, deep, cleansing breath from time to time. You're listening to Mornings with Carmen. All right, take a deep cleansing breath. The good doctor is here, Dr. Jeff Barrows from the Christian Medical and Dental Association. Good morning, Jeff.
Good morning, Carmen. Good to be with you.
The value of a deep cleansing breath?
You know, it is, of course, very helpful, but I wanted to relay a very fascinating statistic that I learned many years ago. We actually, when we take a breath, of course, our atmosphere is mainly made up of nitrogen, 78% roughly, and nitrogen is completely inert. So years ago, one of our members, and actually wrote a book about this, but he calculated the number of nitrogen molecules in the atmosphere and also then brought in the number of breaths that Jesus would have taken while he was on the earth for 33 years. And he found, and of course, nitrogen is recycled. It goes through the atmosphere and it's continually there. It doesn't change. And he calculated that each time we take in a breath, we probably take in 200 molecules of nitrogen that Jesus actually breathed in and out. And I've always found that just fascinating. So when we take a breath in, we literally are taking in some of the same air that Jesus did. So fascinating statistic.
Okay, that is fascinating. See, I'm so glad I asked. Sometimes you come up with something and you're like, that might be the nugget of the day. I appreciate that. All right, I don't think it's going to surprise us that sugary drinks are bad for us and not good for our heart. Diet and sugary drinks have been linked to an increase in AFib risk. First of all, what is AFib, and how do I avoid it?
Yeah, AFib it stands for atrial fibrillation. It's a very rapid beating of one of the small chambers of our heart. Our heart has 4 chambers, 2 upper, 2 lower. The upper are smaller. And AFib is a very rapid beat, 200 to 300 beats per minute of one of the small chambers. The problem with this is that when that chamber is beating so quickly, it doesn't move blood very well. And so blood can clot in that chamber. And so then clot will move into the left ventricle and be shot out into our general circulation. And so what happens then is that it can cause strokes. It's one of the more common causes of stroke. So we definitely want to avoid AFib. If we happen to have AFib and our physician knows it, they'll typically put us on a blood thinner to prevent that clot from forming and preventing stroke. So it's relatively easy to detect. You can just feel your pulse. And if there's a regularity to your heart rate, that's not a concern. AFib will seem like an irregularity. So the story that comes up with this is a study that was published in a recent cardiology journal that looked at over 200,000 participants who were free of AFib. And they looked at their genetic data. They also had them complete a diet questionnaire, and they followed them for almost 10 years. And what they found was that those participants who consumed more than 6, say, cans of cola or sugar beverages a week increase their risk of AFib by 10%. And especially if they used artificial colas, it was 20% increased risk of AFib. Now, on the other side of the coin, a positive they could do would be to drink a few cans of pure fruit juice, like either vegetable juice or orange juice. So they did find that the highest risk was among those that had a family history of AFib, so there is a genetic component to it. And those that had that family history and a high consumption of artificially sweetened pops, 3.5 times risk of AFib. So, as you said, its study doesn't prove that these pops actually cause AFib, but there seems to be a fairly strong correlation. We do know that the pops do increase insulin resistance, type 2 diabetes, weight gain, and all these other negative things. So our daily habits do have a long-term impact on our general health and how long we live. So I would just recommend to your listeners, you don't have to stop pop altogether, but you might want to minimize it and try and substitute a couple of times a week a pure fruit or vegetable beverage like orange juice.
That's good. All right, so let's talk about walking. I don't think this is going to surprise anybody that, walking with God in the cool of the day, that has been a good plan since the beginning of time. Walking with Jesus, actually like walking with Jesus, walk to Emmaus and everywhere else, is a good way to live. We don't walk that much in the world today. We're much more sedentary, and even when we go places, we tend to sit down when we do it. Talk with us about every step we take, and particularly the steps that we take in a given day beyond 2,200 steps.
Yeah, I know that a lot of people know that when you walk, for instance, 3 to 4 miles a day, you get a health benefit. So a lot of your listeners may say, well, I just can't do 3 to 4 miles. So they get a little overwhelmed and they decide not to start walking. But this is the really good news out of this study in the UK. And what they did is they took 500,000, 500,000 individuals between 40 and 69, and they enrolled them in this study. It was between 2006 and 2010 that they were enrolled, and then they followed them for 10 years. They put a exercise monitor on their wrist, and they looked at the number of steps they took. The minimum was 2,200, and that's about a mile, roughly. And what they found, I think is just really good news for your listeners, is that any steps you take beyond 2,200 decreases your mortality. So, and it's cumulative. You don't have to walk that mile all at once. You can just throughout the day, if you have more than 2,200 steps, it begins to reduce your mortality long term. And the benefit didn't reach statistical significance until about 4,000 steps, about 2 miles. But they graph out their results, and you can see an immediate drop as soon as they cross that threshold of 2,200. So I think that's really good news. Again, remember, this is total steps in a day. It's not all at one time. Maximum benefit comes when they reach about 9,000 steps, which is about 4.5 miles. And they found a 10% reduction in all-cause mortality, somewhere between 6 and 10,000, and then also a reduction in heart disease. So I just would say to your listeners, just start walking. Doesn't have to be done all at once. Just walk whenever you can. And I know that there are a lot of people like me who are desk workers. I sit at a desk all day long, and there's a couple of things you can do. You can get a standing desk that can be raised or lowered. Then you can also get a small little walking treadmill, which is becoming popular around our office. They cost less than $200, so you can literally be walking as you work at your desk.
That's so good. All right, we are talking with Jeff Barrows from the Christian Medical and Dental Association. If you are a medical or dental professional, we want to definitely invite you to check out not only the organization and the fellowship, but the resources made available to you at cmda.org. Many of you were very, very interested in the conversation we had earlier this week about a caregiver's guide. There's actually a ton of stuff at cmda.org for families and those of you who are moving into a caregiving role. I particularly found Caregivers, the 5 Steps to Eliminate Legal Hurdles, to be a really, really effective resource. So check out what's available at cmda.org. And if you want some direct links, I'm happy to send them to you as well. Text me, 877-933-2484. We're going to continue our conversation here with Jeff next. I'm going to ask him to reflect on the normalization of illicit drug use in the United States of America. What do we need to know about all of that? That's up next here on Mornings with Carmen. I'm Carmen LaBerge, host of Mornings with Carmen. Take a walk with Jesus today. Walk with him from the Last Supper in the upper room where he washed his disciples' feet to the Garden of Gethsemane where he prayed with blood and sweat and tears. Walk with Jesus today as a man bound by Roman soldiers to trials and abuse, and walk with Jesus all the way to the cross. But expect always the unexpected and anticipate miracles, because there's a whole lot more happening than meets the eye when we walk with Jesus. Connecting faith to life. Faith Radio. Continuing our conversation with Dr. Jeff Barrows from the Christian Medical and Dental Association. Again, check out what is available to you, all the free resources at cmda.org. Jeff, most Americans now live in a state where marijuana is legal. Most of us have at least one dispensary in our county. It's kind of a mess out there. Can you just talk with us a little bit about the normalization of illicit drug use, and maybe how your colleagues are responding to all of it?
Well, it is very concerning, Carmen. Marijuana became legal in both Colorado and Washington in 2012. And since that time, states all across the country have increased their legalization of marijuana. Unfortunately, even this last fall in the recent election, my home state of Ohio legalized marijuana. And so it's really concerning, because marijuana is still a very dangerous drug. And so a lot of people think that now that it's legal, it must be safe. But it causes psychosis, it causes schizophrenia, it causes depression. And the point I would make is that the concentration of the THC, which is the active chemical, the active drug in marijuana, is 10 to 20 times what it was back in the 1960s, because growers have gotten very good at concentrating it. So, people my age might say, well, it was no big deal when I was smoking marijuana back in the 60s and 70s. It's totally changed. It's very different. So there's a great concern on our part at CMDA, and we're fighting the legalization of marijuana. But I think an interesting point is to see that Oregon, which legalized marijuana in 2014, is now reversing their approach to hard drugs. They are, in 2020, they had partially decriminalized possession of all hard drugs, including fentanyl, heroin, cocaine, and methamphetamines. And they only just made, if you were found having those in your possession, you had a fine of $100. You wouldn't go to jail. This was a huge shift for them, and it was kind of an experiment. And they were thinking that they wanted to expand access to drug treatment. It's difficult to do that if the person is in jail. They began what they called a health-based approach to addiction and overdose, and they felt it was more humane. So this this was an experiment, but it failed because what they have found is that now 4 Oregonians a day are dying of drug overdoses. And so, beginning this year, Oregon has completely switched their approach to these hard drugs. The House of Representatives has passed a bill that it now recriminalizes these drugs. The Oregon Senate just voted as well. It's going to the desk of the governor, who has said that she would sign it. And so this bill will take effect September 1st, and those that are found in possession with these hard drugs will serve at least 6 months in jail versus drug treatment. So it's interesting to see that while much of our country is moving toward decriminalizing these possession of these drugs, Oregon has recognized by their brief experiment that it is dangerous and it causes problems. It's wrong thinking. So we need to remember that just because marijuana and other street drugs are becoming legal, they are not safe. They are harmful. And we also should remember marijuana leads to opioid use. That has been shown. It's very clear. So we need to be very wary of utilizing any of these street drugs.
Jeff, there are people who are concerned for all kinds of reasons about whether or not they will have ongoing access to particular kinds of drugs or medication that they have become reliant upon. I was made aware that there are some out there who are concerned specifically about syphilis and its transmission related to pregnancy and the potential for a stock outage of treatments related to that. Like, can you just read us in? This isn't, it's kind of a bizarre story, but, obviously those affected by it are dramatically affected.
Yeah, it is a very interesting story, and this is really one of the unintended consequences of drug use, and that is an increase in all kinds of sexually transmitted infections, including syphilis. When I was practicing OBGYN a number of years ago, it was very rare for me to have a patient that tested positive for syphilis. It's through a blood test that you do on every pregnant woman that comes in your office. I might see it once, maybe twice in a year, but because of the drug crisis, there's been a huge increase in this, and over 200,000 cases were diagnosed in 2022. More than 3,700 babies were born infected with syphilis. So that's a 250% increase in how often that happens. And that's all because of the drug crisis. Now, the tragedy is that treatment is really easy and safe in pregnancy if you make the diagnosis early and the treatment is given. And treatment is simply injectable penicillin. It's a drug, it's the oldest antibiotic that's been around. But unfortunately, injectable penicillin is in short supply. And the reason for that is somewhat controversial. There's only one drug manufacturer of injectable penicillin in the country, and that happens to be Pfizer. Now, about 20 years ago, Pfizer purchased 2 other companies that were making this injectable penicillin, and they shut their factories down. So now they're the only one. And they have, over that 20-year period of time, shown a poor ability to respond to surges of demand. And that's very concerning. This is not the first time. So right now, as we talk, there is a shortage of this injectable penicillin. So if a pregnant woman is diagnosed with syphilis, her provider may have difficulty finding that injectable penicillin for her. So they have to look around. They have to talk to various pharmacies, and so it's very tragic because all they need to do is get really 2 shots of this injectable penicillin, and they don't have any concerns. But if they don't get them in time, it increases the risk to their unborn child of getting that penicillin or that syphilis passed through the pregnancy into them. So. My concern is that we need to have I wouldn't recommend that the government set up a factory for this, but certainly they should consider maybe giving some funding toward a company that is willing to start up a new factory for injectable syphilis, because clearly the demand is out there and they can make some money. So hopefully this will be taken care of. I do know that Pfizer has said that they hope to have this taken care of by no later than June of this year.
Jeff, as always, thank you so very much. Continued prayers for you and your colleagues at the Christian Medical and Dental Association. Thank you for all of the resources that you guys provide free of charge at cmda.org. If you need a resource, maybe, the ethics of being a healthcare professional. Maybe you need a guide for your family meeting. Maybe you need, as a caregiver, to know what the steps are to eliminate legal hurdles. I mean, all kinds of things, in addition to all of the contemporary issues that are facing us in the culture and the medical or dental perspective on those from a Christian worldview. All of that at cmda.org. All right, let me share a bit of news here with you about The Chosen. For those of you who had the opportunity to see the theatrical release of season 4 in theaters, you guys have given a ton of feedback on that. Maybe you have also noted that the streaming release of season 4 has been interrupted. Now, that has been interrupted by some kind of lawsuit. We're not all really clear yet on what's going on. Here's what we do know. The Come and See Foundation, which we hosted them here on the show. They're going to make The Chosen available, around the world to people in other languages. You remember that conversation we had with Stan Jantz a few weeks ago? Well, the Come and See Foundation exists to make sure that all 7 episodes of The Chosen are not only completed and translated into all these other languages, but continuing to be available free. So here's what they're doing to answer the challenge currently being faced by the release of season 4. The Come and See Foundation is going to make the first 2 episodes of season 4 available to churches and prisons to host them free of charge starting tomorrow, March the 13th. So if your church wants to host a free screening for your congregation, for your community, you just go to comeandsee.net/church, or maybe that's a slash. I don't know. I can send you the link. comeandsee.net/church. And then Prison Fellowship is partnering to make The Chosen season 4 episodes 1 and 2 that are already available or have been available as a theatrical release. Prison Fellowship is making those available in prisons. And so I want you to be praying that God would use this. What others meant for evil, which is the disruption of season 4 being released and streaming. I mean, it's going to come. It's just a matter of, figuring out how to legally get there, I guess. But what some meant for evil, God means for good. And so this is going to be an opportunity for churches to do outreach in your local communities and do it free of charge. You have free access to this at comeandsee.net/church. And Prison Fellowship is making it available in prisons across the country as well. So that is really, really cool. Again, text me. I'll send you the direct link for the info. 877-933-2484. All right. Do you know a child who is maybe not thriving in their current educational environment? Think about that for just a second. Do you know a child who is not thriving in their current educational environment? Want some help with that? Cynthia Tobias joins us next. Reclaiming Education. You're listening to Mornings with Carmen. Hey, do you know a child who is not fully thriving in their current educational environment? How are you going to help them? How are you going to reclaim their educational experience? Cynthia Ulrich Tobias is with us now. The book is Reclaiming Education. Teach your child to be a confident learner. Cynthia, welcome to Mornings with Carmen.
Thank you, Carmen. It's great to be here.
All right, you're literally like one of those been there, done that people. Like you have not only like raised your own kids, you've taught others people's kids in high school, you've been a law enforcement officer, you have searched out the best in education, and you've seen some of the worst of it. Tell us a little bit about this project, because this isn't just a book, this is really a project. Talk with us about Reclaiming Education and your partner involved in this as well.
It is a project, and I feel like I was, not to be overly dramatic, but commissioned by God to do it. the book begins in the preface by saying war has been declared on America's families. I think that's true. I think especially in public schools, in that arena, where our children are more vulnerable than ever to the onslaught of indoctrination instead of education. And whether you can afford to send your child to a Christian school or whether you decide to homeschool or whatever you have to do, we want to make sure that we're teaching our children the confidence to have in themselves to know how they learn. One of the things, of course, you probably already know is that we want our kids to learn, but they aren't born automatically knowing how to do that. So this book is really meant to empower parents and children in order to figure out, how do I learn? How does my mind work? How do I do hard things? What am I supposed to be on guard for? How do I know I'm going to be able to do this? And and what I'm really proud of is Focus on the Family and Tyndale, who published the book. They granted my request to have a QR code in the back of the book so that parents and teachers and kids can instantly have a 22-page workbook that, using the book as a guide, they can right away begin to equip their children from preschool on up through adult for figuring out for themselves how to be successful and how to recognize what to do when things get hard and what to recognize as far as the truth.
That's so good. What to do when things get hard is definitely going to be a part of the conversation I want to have with you today. I think I want to start with this. And again, now that you guys know a little bit about what we're talking about, let me reintroduce you to Cynthia Tobias. The book is Reclaiming Education, Teach Your Child to be a Confident Learner. You may also recognize the name of her collaborator, Mary Jo Dean. If you're a person experienced in homeschooling at all, Mary Jo's name is probably familiar to you as well. Cynthia, when we talk about reclaiming education, maybe just give us the bottom line. If there's somebody who only heard this minute of our conversation, what's the one thing you want to make sure they know about reclaiming education?
It's so important not to put your child's education on autopilot. Send them to the default option and just hope for the best. Now more than ever, parents have to be involved. Christian parents, especially, you have to be involved. Whether it's Mary Jo wrote a wonderful couple of chapters in this book for giving encouragement when you're going to homeschool full time, whether you're just going to have to be your child's warrior partner. But you have to be present, and you have to, in part of this book and the power of this book is that you can shift a lot of responsibility for success in learning to the child himself or herself. And this is very empowering, as well as turning them into lifelong learners, so that what they learn now, they can, as adults, as college students, as trade workers, all the training they have to do the rest of their life, they know how to do that. They're not daunted by it, and they can have choices that God, wherever God leads them, they're going to know how to cope with it, rather than say, I never was good at that, or I just don't know about that, and I don't think it's too much for me to learn. We're going to get over those obstacles, and it's amazingly easy to do. This is a short, compelling read. It's 128 pages, and then the 22-page student workbook that you can immediately use. And I just feel like God has commissioned it to give parents confidence in order to instill confidence and faith in their children about how God created them and the gifts and natural strengths that He's equipped them with.
That is so good. That's so good. So, Cynthia, you talk a lot about a child's learning style. How can I figure out, what my kid's learning style is and maybe identify the strengths related to that?
Well, one of the best clues, believe it or not, is you figure out kind of what annoys you. What irritates you about this child? He talks too much. She doesn't pay attention. She won't sit still. Most of that is actually a pretty good clue. Not sitting still, maybe you've got a really kinesthetic learner that if you do make me sit still, all I can think about is moving. But if you'll let me just move a little while you talk to me, now my body has released me from the need to move because I'm doing it, and now I can pay attention to you. The child who's talking too much, Well, sometimes with the auditory learner, they have to hear their own voice say it before they can understand what you just told them. So they might repeat things or they might blurt out questions because it's the sound of their own voice that's going to make it stick. Right. And the visual learner, like I'm a real visual learner too. I have to have a picture. And if you don't give me a picture, I'm going to have to create one. And it's not always the best picture, not always the most accurate. But recognizing those and recognizing I'm a very global big picture learner. My husband, just the opposite, very analytic. And in a conversation or in a clash between an analytic parent and a more global child, the parent can become very frustrated. Why can't you just do things in order? Why can't you just do one thing before you go on to the next? Well, I'm a pretty global learner, and I work in bursts of inspiration followed by long plateaus of nothingness. So I need to do many things at once so that when I lose my inspiration for this thing, I've already started with another. And that's not hard to do, to notice. Start with the irritations. And of course, the workbook will help the kids themselves. You can ask them the questions there. And it's been amazing as they're answering, how they learn and writing down their preferences. They go, oh, no wonder. Yeah, this is why I can't, and this is what I need. And it's a very empowering thing.
Wow. As you're going through that sort of like what's annoys you list, I'm thinking about kindergarten Carmen, right? I mean, I was 5 when I got my first F. And so like kindergarten Carmen, I'll tell you the story and maybe you'll tell me what kind of learner I am. I came home with an F on my paper and my mom was supposed to sign it. And it was that like kind of newsprinty paper, but it did have lines on it. And then it had that dashed line in there. And my name was written, in that top segment, but nothing else on the paper. And my mom looked at it and said, "What were you supposed to do?" Because I think my mom already knew me, right? And
Right.
I said, I was supposed to write my name 5 times. And my mom said, "Why didn't you?" And I said, "I wrote it right the first time."
There you go.
So my little kindergarten
straw
teacher was
quilt.
super annoyed with me, I'm sure. And instead of whatever else she might have done to encourage my independent learning style, she just gave me an F and told me my paper should be signed. So,
Yeah, and that's a classic example of one of the things I talk about in the book, which is what's the point? Accountability should be there. But it's like you say, 5-year-old Carmen, you said write my name, and I did it right the first time. I don't need practice because if the point was to write my name, here it is. But maybe the teacher was thinking you just need to practice, and it didn't make sense to you. And and it's terrible to give a kindergartner an F. Let me just say that it's
oh,
a
it's
horrible
okay.
thing. But
This strong-willed child did just fine.
yeah, I did too, and I had my share of encounters because, and again, you and I would both say, "What is the point? What were you trying? I mean, I don't understand what you're trying to prove here because I don't need to do that because I know it, and I'm not trying to be insubordinate or smart alecky, although I can certainly do that, and I have been guilty of that. But give me some credit." And, even kids, really young kids, we want credit for being a little bit intelligent here. We can figure things out. And especially if you give us the ability to figure things out in ways that you want us to figure them out, we can do it.
Yeah.
Tell us
I
what
want to
you're
talk a
doing.
little bit about, I want to talk a little bit about that next because you really do supply us with some really great tools that students, if they have these tools, they can really be successful on their own. And so I want to talk about, how we identify the right tools for the right kid and really set them free. Our conversation is about reclaiming education. Teach your child to be a confident learner. Cynthia Tobias is one of the co-authors along with Mary Jo Dean. If you want the direct links, I'm happy to send them to you. You guys know how to get in touch with me. Text me at 877-933-2484. Again, there's a great QR code in the back of the book that unlocks a 22-page student workbook that you can use immediately with your learner. We want kids to be, we want them to be learning, but we want them to be learning in a way that fits their learning style. And as parents and grandparents and and others who care a lot about what kids are and are not learning in their current educational environments. This is a real gift to our ongoing conversation today. So you're listening to Mornings with Carmen, and we'll be right back. Receive a daily email featuring a scripture graphic. Sign up for the verse of the day email at myfaithradio.com. Continuing our conversation with Cynthia Tobias. You can find her at cynthiatobias.com. Again, I'm happy to send you the direct links. Just text me 877-933-2484. We're talking about her new book, Reclaiming Education, but it's more than a book, it's a project. Teach your child to be a confident learner. And in the back, there's a QR code with a 22-page student workbook that you can immediately use, which is just really great as well. Let's talk a little bit about the tools that students need to be successful today, and how we access those tools for our kids. So, I mean, like, I think one of the things that you talk about is like, how do we actually help them figure out the things they need to guard against, and then help them do that?
Right. Well, of course, and number one, and we emphasize this in the book too, regardless of what their learning style is or the situation they're in, you as their parents and in their home, this sacred space, you need to give them a solid and firm foundation. I will always be grateful for my parents who gave me a solid foundation in Jesus Christ and in my faith, so that I always had hope and I always knew where to go in my discouragement. The other thing that, you ask some questions, it doesn't have to be a formal thing. You don't even have to have them take a test. When they encounter frustration and kindergarten Carmen comes home, or, discouraged Cynthia, seventh grader, who knows what's up or down in seventh grade, and I'm frustrated and I hate math and I don't know what to do. Well, ask me, what do you think is most frustrating about it? I just don't understand. I don't understand it. Well, what do you think would make it easier? Ask questions. What we're trying to do, the bottom line is, we're trying to shift responsibility, more of it, to the learner for their own success, because we only have them for a short time in the greater scheme of things. The rest of their lives, they're going to have faith in God to call on, and they're going to need to have that ability and that knowledge of what they need in order to succeed. And I was able to do this with my high school students. I was able to do this with my sons, and to be able to say, what do you think you're going to need? Well, I don't know. And well, what do you think would help? Where do you want to start? When they say it and when they have to search for it, you're there to guide them. And this is valuable time, but you want them to search it out themselves. And for instance, with a lot of my students, when they were supposedly low achievers, but when I started asking them questions and they figured out, oh, no wonder I can't concentrate if I have people talking, or I can't concentrate unless I am talking. And the light bulbs that would come on when they take responsibility for their own success, it gives them all kinds of tools for the faith and the encouragement that they're going to need for the rest of their lives.
That's so good. So, there may be one kid who knows that it would make it easier for them if the environment were really, really quiet, maybe even total silence. And yet in that same space, there's a student who, if they're not talking and talking through it and sort of verbally working through it, they're not going to get it. Right. So you can see how those two students, literally in the same environment, cannot both be successful. And that's really helpful. That's when you're talking about it being individualized. That's what we're getting to here. Like, what is your kid's learning style? And then let's figure out how to get them into that kind of environment and the tools they need, and then really let them do it. Can you talk about that part? This is really a let them do it kind of approach.
Right, because we don't let them use it as an excuse. Again, we go back to that. What's the point? The point is, this is where we need to end up. How do you think there's another way to get there? And let them experiment. Be empathetic, if they're real discouraged. Wow, fourth grade, it's kind of tough on some days. What can I do to help? What do you think you could do that would make it easier for us to do at home, even if things don't change where you're learning?
That's so good. That's so good. Cynthia, thank you so much for who you are, for what you're doing, for the way you're doing it. Thank you for this incredible project and the resources that you're offering to us. Thank you for the labor of love and for receiving the commission of God to take this project on. What a blessing. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Carmen, for sharing, and I really do. And blessings to you.
Yeah, thank you so much. That's Cynthia Tobias. You can connect with her at cynthiatobias.com. The book is Reclaiming Education. Teach your child to be a confident learner. I'm happy to send you the direct links. Just text me, 877-933-2484. All right, we are almost out of time today, but I have this one brief headline that I want to share with you because it's one of those, hey, you're going to see this. You are literally going to see this at some point in time, and I want you to see what's not there. And sometimes it's hard to see what's not there. So I want to tell you in advance that it's important to see what's not there in the 2024 posters for the Paris Olympics. Yeah, I want you to see what's not there. So a couple of days ago, they released, you know, those iconic posters that they've been making every year for, I don't know, more than 100 years, every time that there's an Olympic Games, those iconic posters. Yeah, well, they just released the art for the 2024 Olympics in Paris. These posters, quote, depict a fantasy city, a gigantic stadium that brings together, you know, all of the monuments in the city of Paris. So I want you to think about all of the monuments in the city of Paris. And then I want you to imagine them reinterpreted without any symbols related to the Christian faith. Okay, think about all of the iconic monuments in the capital city of Paris. And now I want you to remove any Christian symbols. The fantasy city that is depicted in the 2024 Olympics posters is a fantasy city where every symbol of Jesus is removed. I mean, are these beautiful, colorful, whimsical posters? Yes, they are. But even the cross on top of the church where, it's crazy. Where Napoleon is buried is what I was going to say. I mean, even that iconic church, which is pictured here in this poster of the Olympic Games, even the cross on the top of the church has been removed. In fact, there's not one cross anywhere in view in the depiction of this fantasy city of Paris. So when you think about art and you think about the way art informs us and what we see, images matter. And what's being communicated about the quote-unquote fantasy city of Paris where no evidence of Christ is evident in the symbology. This is an interesting conversation topic you might have today with somebody else. Have a great day, and God bless. Thanks for listening to Mornings with Carmen LaBerge. Podcasts like this are available because of your support. If it's important to you to hear things that encourage your faith, click the link in the show notes to give now. And thanks.